Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Library, where Star Wars is in print, the Force is with the readers, and we return to 1980 for the last of the Han Solo adventures. I'm your host Nathan P. Butler. We have already taken a look at Han Solo at Star's End and Han Solo's Revenge. That leaves one book left in Brian Daley's Han Solo Adventures trilogy. That book is the one we're taking a look at this time, Han Solo and the Lost Legacy. Yeah, my copy here is a little bit beat up. This is the original paperback printing, as with all the other Del Rey books from their first round as Star Wars publisher. These were released first in paperback only. The only way you could get hardback is through the Sci-Fi Book Club at the time. Most people who've read this have probably read it instead as some sort of anthology, with this being one of the most prominent copies of it, simply known as the Han Solo Adventures. And it's kind of a cool thing that we're wrapping this up because we are just a matter of weeks away from the release in January of 2013 of Timothy Zahn's new Han Solo-focused novel, which is Scoundrels here. So this will be a nice time for those who are really interested in early Han Solo stuff to go back and reread some of these, because it has the same feel in a lot of ways in Scoundrels as what we got with those earlier books. This story takes place, again, during the Han Solo trilogy by Anne Crispin, or at least it'll be worked into that trilogy later on by Anne Crispin. This, of course, was written much, much earlier. And it is a story set about a year prior to A New Hope, focusing on the events in the aftermath of Han Solo's Revenge. At this point, Han and Chewbacca are in the Tyon hegemony, and they are needing some quick cash, as it seems like they always are. After a few misadventures, they wind up on the trail of the Queen of Ranroon, which is a treasure ship of the great Zim the Despot, who had ruled this sort of, not galaxy-spanning, but large empire prior to the birth of the Republic. In the process of hunting it down, they wind up running across Galandro yet again from Han Solo's Revenge, that great gunslinger of the galaxy. They wind up finally finding the treasure, only for it not to really be a treasure per se. They run across some of the descendants of Zim's empire who basically want to kill them. When it's all said and done, Han hasn't had to kill Galandro himself. Galandro's been killed by some of Zim's war droids that were guarding the treasure. They wind up essentially walking away empty-handed, because this treasure that was supposed to be an actual treasure is actually more just things that Zim was stockpiling in his grab for more power. Really, in a lot of ways, this story is non-essential. You know, we always ask that question, I guess we'll ask it now. Is this story an essential read? No, it's not. But it does manage to wrap up this trilogy fairly well. It feels more like a continuation of Han Solo's Revenge than Han Solo's Revenge felt like a continuation of Han Solo at Star's End, in that Galandro does come back. We wind up seeing the death of Galandro, which, in a continuity sense here, sets up a bit about what we're going to see much, much later in Kevin J. Anderson and Rebecca Moesta's final trilogy of Young Jedi Knights books, which will feature his daughter, see there, Anja Galandro over here. Really hard to do this when I'm looking at it reversed. And it does manage to set up a long-running concept in Star Wars that has gotten a lot of depth in recent memory, which is this idea of a pre-Republic civilization, the Tynese, run by Zim the Despot, or Daritha Zim, with Daritha being a possible progenitor term for Darth. That story eventually was given a lot of depth in some of the background books, and by a lot in that case I just mean sort of a little bit of depth given at different times that slowly built up this myth of Zim, but it really wasn't given a full telling until very, very recently. We had a little bit of background recently on Zim the Despot and the Tynese and how all that stuff led into other events with Dan Wallace and Jason Fry's The Essential Atlas. Now, The Essential Atlas, this copy of it, I had a chance to help out on this and do some dates for those dated battle maps and such. So, for instance, things like, let's find the Hunt for Zinj, for instance, map here. If you look at some of these maps in there, you'll find that they have different battle dates listed on them. That's something that I contributed to the book, and eventually I was able, as a sort of thank you, to get a copy of the Essential Atlas that was actually signed by Chris Travas, Chris Reeve, Dan Wallace, and Jason Fry here, which was kind of cool there. But that book did a lot to establish some more of the background here, sort of tie it all together, tie it into the Treaty of Vontor and such, the way that the Hutts get their hands on these slave races, why they're so loyal to them for so long, those sorts of things sort of leading up to the creation of the Republic a little while later on. And it later got even more depth in, again, Jason Fry, and this time Paul Urquhart's The Essential Guide to Warfare, which was very recent. So between those two, we now have a lot of depth for Zim the Despot, but we've never had that in the first place if it had not been for Han Solo and the Lost Legacy. It's a book that has more of an impact in its side references than in the story itself. But it is a pretty good read, and it is unfortunately Brian Daley's last novel contribution to Star Wars, although he will be the one who is, of course, behind the radio dramas, including all the way up to Return of the Jedi. He is also the man who will be responsible for one of those interesting audio dramas that aren't based on the films called Rebel Mission to Ord Mantell, which we'll take a look at sometime in the future on the show here. So is it an essential read, as I already answered? No, it is not, but it's kind of a neat read. If you've read Han Solo's Revenge, you should probably read this one, and I would say that of all of the Han Solo Adventures books, this is the one that's the best read, because at least it ties into something we see a lot more of in the EU, and that is, of course, the Zim the Despot stuff. For now, we'll wrap up this episode. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the readers.